Bandaging a wounded predator's cub went against every corporate protocol, not to mention basic survival instincts on the death world of Tartarus. 9. Doctor. Aidan Penhaligon fully anticipated being mauled by the native wildlife that usually treated humans as light snacks. By treating the creature anyway, he unwittingly established an interspecies clinic that would rewrite human history. It was a lie, of course. Aidan stared at the blinking cursor on his terminal, the dim blue light washing over his exhausted features. Out here on New Svalbard, an ice-choked mining rock orbiting Ross 128. A lie like that could get a man's corporate charter revoked, but the truth would have gotten him executed by the colony's automated defense grid. Aidan was a pragmatist. Before taking the contract with Aegis Resource Management, he had spent a decade as a trauma surgeon in the sprawling mega-wards of Neo-London, patching up gang members and corporate enforcers alike. He knew when to look the other way. But the native wildlife of New Svalbard, classified formally as Ursus calibs, and informally, by the terrified miners as iron hides, tested the limits of his pragmatism. These creatures were biological nightmares. Six-limbed apex predators the size of earth grizzly bears, armored in overlapping plates of dark, chitinous bone. They possessed a rudimentary pack intelligence and a territorial aggression that made them the undisputed masters of the frozen tundra. Human protocol dictated immediate lethal force upon contact. Aegis deployed automated Gauss turrets along the perimeter, designed to shred anything larger than a snow hare that crossed the laser tripwires. 2 hours ago, the storm of the decade had knocked out the eastern grid. Aidan had been dispatched in a heavy-duty crawler to manually reset the breakers at Tower 4. The wind had been howling at 60 miles an hour, driving ice particles like buckshot against his environmental suit. He had just locked the breaker back into place when he heard it, a sound that pierced through the mechanical roar of the storm. It was a sharp, high-pitched keening. It sounded terrifyingly like a human child in agony. Aidan had frozen, his hand drifting instinctively to the heavy sidearm strapped to his thigh. He activated his helmet's thermal optics. 30 yards away, just outside the perimeter fence, a small, bright orange heat signature was thrashing wildly against the frozen earth. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching in the deep snow. The sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a child. It was an ironhide cub, no larger than a golden retriever. The juvenile beast had somehow slipped past the primary sensors during the blackout, only to become hopelessly entangled in the secondary ring of high-tensile razor wire. The wire had bitten deep into its right forelimb and, tearing through the softer flesh beneath its underdeveloped armor plates. The snow beneath it was stained a shocking, vibrant purple, the color of the creature's oxygen-rich blood. "Leave it," his training screamed. "If the cub is here, the pack is close. If the pack catches you, there won't be enough left to fill a bio bag." The cub let out another agonizing screech, its 4 dark, multifaceted eyes locking onto Aidan. It snapped its jaws, bearing rows of needle-sharp teeth, but the display was entirely born of terror. It was bleeding out. Within an hour, the cold or the blood loss would take it. "Damn it all to hell," Aidan muttered. He didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he dropped to his knees in the slush, unclipping the heavy medical kit from his belt. He pulled out a specialized 3M synthetic dermal plast injector, a real piece of high-end Earth tech meant to seal hull breaches on spacesuits and human arteries alike. The cub thrashed as Aidan reached out. He had to be quick. He grabbed the creature by the scruff of its armored neck, pinning it to the ground with his body weight. The sheer dense muscle beneath his hands was astounding. Even a juvenile possessed the strength to break his wrists. "Easy, you little monster. Easy," Aidan grunted, his voice vibrating through his helmet's external speakers. He used heavy-duty surgical shears to snap the razor wire, pulling the barbed metal free from the wound. The cub shrieked, a sound that made Aidan's teeth ache. He immediately flooded the deep laceration with a generous application of biofoam, watching as the expanding white substance instantly cauterized the ruptured vessels and sealed the gap. Because the foam was highly susceptible to the extreme cold before it fully cured, Aidan didn't stop there. He pulled out a roll of heavy-duty, high-visibility orange compression bandaging standard issue for human trauma and wrapped it tightly around the cub's paw, securing it with medical-grade staples. "There," Aidan gasped, stepping back and raising his hands defensively. "Good as new. Now get out of here before the turrets come back online. The cub scrambled to its feet, holding its brightly bandaged limb awkwardly in the air. It didn't run immediately. It turned, staring at Aiden for a long, heavy moment. It chuffed a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in Aiden's chest plate before turning and vanishing into the blinding white of the storm. Aiden had barely made it back to the crawler when the power grid surged back to life, the Gauss turrets whirring menacingly as they targeted the empty snowdrifts. Now, sitting in the safety of the med bay, Aiden deleted his initial draft of the medical log. He couldn't risk leaving a digital trail. If Security Chief Thomas Harding found out a medic had wasted valuable 3M synthetic dermoplast on a hostile alien predator, Aiden wouldn't just be fired. He'd be brought up on charges of corporate sabotage. It was just an anomaly, Aiden told himself, rubbing his tired eyes. A moment of weakness. It's over now. He had absolutely no idea what he had just started. The next 48 hours on New Svalbard were tense. Aegis Resource Management was pushing the miners hard, trying to meet an aggressive export quota of refined palladium before the planetary winter set in permanently. Exhaustion was leading to carelessness, and Aiden's medbay was flooded with plasma burns, crushed phalanges, and cases of acute frostbite. Throughout the chaos, Chief Harding paced the colony corridors like a caged tiger. Harding was a career military man, discharged from the Coalition Marines for reasons he never disclosed, and he approached colony security as if they were in an active war zone. "I'm telling you, Penhaligon, they're testing the fences," Harding barked on the third evening, slamming a datapad onto Aiden's desk. "The Ironhides. Look at the seismic readouts from Sector 4. Aiden glanced at the pad, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The graph showed a massive spike in heavy footfalls just beyond the perimeter line, where he had fixed the breaker. Maybe the storm disrupted their migratory patterns, Aiden suggested smoothly, checking a miner's vitals on a nearby monitor. "Bullshit," Harding spat. "They're hunting. They smell the thermal exhaust from the refinery, and they're looking for a way in. I've ordered double shifts on the watchtowers and authorized live ammunition for all perimeter patrols. If you see anything out there, you hit the panic button. Understood?" "Loud and clear, Chief." Harding stormed out, leaving Aiden alone in the quiet hum of the night shift. The medbay was located on the ground floor of the colony's outer ring, boasting a single, heavily reinforced permaglass window that looked out over the desolate, floodlit tundra. At 0200 hours, the proximity alarm on Aiden's personal console chimed softly. It wasn't the blaring klaxon of a colony-wide breach. It was a subtle, low-frequency warning triggered by the localized motion sensors directly outside the medbay window. Aiden's blood ran cold. He slowly stood up, turning off the overhead surgical lights to eliminate his reflection on the glass. He crept toward the window, peering out into the swirling snow. The floodlights illuminated a scene that defied all logic, biology, and human understanding. Sitting perfectly still in the snow, directly beneath the glare of the halogen lights, was an alpha iron hide. It was a gargantuan specimen, standing at least 8 feet tall at the shoulder. Its jet-black armor scarred and pitted from years of survival. Its 4 eyes glowed like embers in the darkness. Aiden held his breath, his hand hovering over the emergency panic button. He waited for the beast to charge the glass, to test the structural integrity of the permaglass with its massive claws. It did nothing of the sort. Instead, the alpha let out a low, rumbling chuff. From the shadows beyond the floodlights, a smaller figure emerged. It was the cub. Aiden recognized the obnoxious, high-visibility orange bandage wrapped securely around its forelimb. The cub limped forward, completely unbothered by the blazing floodlights or the humming colony generators, and sat down next to the alpha. They didn't come to attack, Aiden realized, his mind racing to process the impossibility of the situation. They tracked my scent. They know exactly where I am. But the bizarre tableau wasn't finished. The alpha nudged the cub gently with its massive snout, pushing it to the side. Then, it looked directly through the permaglass, straight into Aiden's eyes, and let out another series of short, deliberate grunts. From the darkness of the tree line, another shape emerged. This ironhide was fully grown but emaciated, moving with a severe, agonizing limp. As it stepped into the light, Aiden could see the horrific damage. A massive, jagged shard of metallic debris, likely shrapnel from an old mining explosive, was driven deep into the creature's hind quarter. Dark purple blood oozed sluggishly from the infected wound. The injured beast limped forward, collapsing in the snow directly in front of the window. The alpha stepped back, sitting on its haunches like a massive, terrifying guard dog, waiting. Behind the alpha, just at the edge of the light, Aiden saw the silhouettes. 5 more ironhides. They were all sitting in the snow. They were all completely still. They had formed a queue. "You have got to be kidding me," Aiden whispered, his hand slowly backing away from the panic button. Centuries of human science dictated that pack bonding across completely alien biospheres was impossible, that true altruism didn't exist in apex predators. But staring through the glass, Aiden realized something profound. Empathy wasn't just a human trait, it was a universal currency. He had shown mercy to their young, and the pack's rudimentary intelligence had processed this data, categorized humans, or at least this specific human, as a healer, and brought him their wounded. He had wrapped a bandage around a cub's paw, and the others had brought him every scratch, tear, and laceration they had. Aiden's medical oath, the one he swore back in Neo-London, echoed in his mind. First, do no harm. Second, treat the patient before you. It didn't specify species. Aiden grabbed his heavy winter parka, slung his trauma kit over his shoulder, and engaged the airlock cycle for the medbay's exterior maintenance door. The hiss of the pressure seal breaking sounded louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. As the heavy steel door slid open, the biting wind of New Svalbard hit Aiden in the face. The alpha's head snapped toward him. Every muscle in the giant creature's body tensed. Aiden froze, holding his hands up slowly, palms open. "I don't have a weapon," Aiden said, his voice trembling slightly despite himself. He pointed to the injured beast bleeding in the snow. "I'm just going to look at your friend, okay? Just looking." He took a slow step forward. The snow crunched loudly. The alpha let out a long, warning hiss, its mandibles clicking together. But the cub with the orange bandage trotted forward, placing itself between Aiden and the giant alpha. It bumped its head against the alpha's leg, letting out a soft chirping sound. The tension broke. The alpha relaxed its posture, stepping back to allow Aiden to pass. Aiden knelt in the slush beside the injured adult. Up close, the creature smelled of ozone, copper, and wet fur. The beast let out a low growl of pain as Aiden examined the shrapnel. "This is going to hurt, big guy," Aiden muttered, pulling out a heavy-duty plasma scalpel and a set of mechanics pliers he used for extracting bullets. "But if I don't get this out, the sepsis will kill you by morning." Aiden worked with practiced efficiency. He flooded the area with a localized topical anesthetic spray, waited 10 seconds, and clamped the pliers onto the jagged metal. With a sharp, powerful heave, he ripped the shrapnel free. The beast roared, a deafening sound that shook the snow from the nearby rooftops. The alpha tensed, taking a half step forward, but Aiden immediately packed the gaping wound with biofoam, sealing the injury and halting the pain. He finished it off with a large dermoplast patch, smoothing it over the thick hide. "Done," Aiden breathed, stepping back and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the sub-zero temperature. The injured beast scrambled to its feet. It sniffed at the patch, let out a confused but relieved snort, and then did something utterly unexpected. It nudged Aiden's shoulder with its massive, armored snout, a gentle bump that nearly knocked the doctor off his feet, before limping back toward the tree line. Aiden let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked toward the next silhouette in the darkness, waving it forward. "All right," Aiden called out to the void. "Who's next?" He spent the next hour working in the freezing cold. He splinted a fractured leg on a juvenile using spare titanium rods from the supply closet. He flushed and stitched a massive claw mark across another adult's flank, likely a territorial dispute with a rival pack. He even extracted an infected tooth from a remarkably docile female, using a pair of heavy industrial grips. He was just finishing the final bandage when the blinding beam of a security spotlight hit him square in the eyes. "Penhaligon, step away from the creatures." The voice boomed over the colony's external public address system. Aiden shielded his eyes against the glare, looking up at the catwalk of Watchtower 3. Chief Harding was standing there, a heavy Gauss rifle pressed tight to his shoulder, the laser targeting sight dancing directly over the Alpha's chest. Behind Harding, A squad of heavily armed security contractors was pouring out of the barracks, their weapons raised. "Chief, hold your fire." Aiden screamed, stepping directly into the path of the targeting laser, placing his own body between the security team and the massive alpha predator. "They aren't hostile." "Are you out of your mind?" Harding roared. "You're fraternizing with an alpha-class threat. Step aside, Doc. I am authorizing lethal force to neutralize the breach." The alpha, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere and the aggressive posture of the new humans, let out a deep, terrifying bellow. The rest of the pack, which had been peacefully waiting in the shadows, stepped forward, baring their teeth and clicking their chitinous armor plates together. The clinic was closed. The war was about to begin. The laser sight from Chief Harding's Gauss rifle burned a brilliant, cherry-red dot onto the center of Aiden's chest plate. "I am giving you 3 seconds, Penhaligon." Harding's voice echoed over the PA system, distorted by the howling wind and the sheer panic vibrating in his throat. "Step away from the hostile. 1. They are not hostile, Thomas. Look at them." Aiden screamed back, his voice tearing at his vocal cords. He threw his arms wide, trying to make himself as large a target as possible. He knew the kinetic impact of a Gauss round. It wouldn't just kill him, it would punch a hole clean through him and strike the alpha behind him, triggering a massacre. 2. The security contractors on the catwalk shifted nervously. A young corporal named Jenkins lowered his weapon a fraction of an inch, looking toward Harding with wide, terrified eyes. "Chief, the doc is in the line of fire." "I gave a direct order, Corporal." Harding snapped, his eye pressed tight to the thermal scope. 3. Aiden braced himself, squeezing his eyes shut. He expected the deafening crack of hyper-accelerated tungsten. He expected the sudden cold numbness of a shattered sternum. Instead, he was engulfed in total darkness. A massive, suffocating weight pressed against his back, driving him face first into the freezing slush. Aiden gasped, the breath knocked from his lungs, as a deafening, metallic clang rang out through the icy air. He opened his eyes, spitting out dirty snow, and realized he wasn't dead. He was pinned beneath a cavernous arch of jet-black chitinous armor. The alpha had moved. With a speed that defied its gargantuan mass, the beast had surged forward and positioned itself directly over Aiden, straddling him like a protective shell. Harding had pulled the trigger, but the tungsten slug had ricocheted off the alpha's heavily armored shoulder plate, leaving nothing but a smoking, superficial crater in the beast's natural shielding. A stunned silence fell over the colony courtyard. Up on the catwalk, Harding froze, his rifle slightly lowered. The human mind was not built to process what he was seeing. An apex predator of Tartarus, 9, a creature responsible for the deaths of 42 miners since Aegis Resource Management broke ground, had just taken a bullet to protect a human doctor. Beneath the beast, Aiden slowly turned his head. The alpha looked down at him, its 4 deep-set eyes blinking slowly. A hot drop of purple blood fell from its shoulder, sizzling as it hit the snow inches from Aiden's face. It let out a low, rumbling chuff that vibrated through the frozen earth and right into Aiden's bones. "You big, beautiful idiot," Aiden whispered, tears of adrenaline prickling the corners of his eyes. "Doc." Harding's voice came over the localized comms, stripped of all its military bluster, replaced by raw shock. "Doc, what the hell is happening down there?" Before Aiden could formulate an answer, the ground answered for him. It didn't start with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, sickening drop in atmospheric pressure that popped Aiden's ears inside his helmet. The snow beneath his boots began to vibrate, vibrating so fast it seemed to levitate in a terrifying mist. Then came the roar. It was a sound of ancient, subterranean agony. The warning sirens of New Svalbard didn't trigger, because the threat wasn't coming from the perimeter. It was coming from 2 miles straight down. "Seismic anomaly," Jenkins screamed from the watchtower, dropping his rifle to clutch the railing. "Magnitude 8 oh God." The ice beneath Sector 7 of the colony, the primary palladium refinery, and the subterranean dormitories violently heaved upward before collapsing in on itself. A geyser of pressurized methane gas, trapped beneath the permafrost for millions of years, erupted through the bedrock, instantly igniting as it hit the sparks of the failing colony generators. A pillar of blue and orange fire shot 500 feet into the night sky. The shockwave hit 3 seconds later. It hit the colony like a physical wall, shattering the permaglass window of the medbay and blowing Harding and his security team flat off the catwalk. Aiden was spared the brunt of the blast, solely because he was entirely encased by the Alpha's massive body. The beast dug its 6 heavy claws deep into the permafrost, bracing against the hurricane of debris and fire. Jagged chunks of steel and ice rained down upon its armored back, but it did not budge an inch. The rest of the pack, huddled nearby, instinctively formed a tight, overlapping circle around the juveniles and the injured, weathering the storm with a stoic, prehistoric resilience. When the shockwave finally passed, the silence that followed was absolute, save for the crackle of secondary fires and the groaning of twisted metal. The Alpha slowly stepped back, allowing Aiden to scramble to his feet. The doctor turned toward the colony, and his blood ran cold. Sector 7 was gone. In its place was a massive, smoking crater. Half of the refinery stack had toppled across the subterranean access lifts, trapping an entire night shift crew of miners beneath thousands of tons of steel and crushed permafrost. Aiden's comlink suddenly crackled to life, filled with static and a voice dripping with corporate bureaucracy. New Svalbard Command. This is Regional Director Simon Caldwell monitoring from the orbital station. We are reading a catastrophic drop in palladium output. Harding, what the hell did you let happen down there? I want a full damage assessment on the processing arrays immediately. Aiden stared at the burning wreckage. Caldwell, this is Dr. Penhaligon. The arrays are gone. Sector 7 has collapsed. We have dozens of men trapped under the ice. We need heavy lifting gear and medevac shuttles down here immediately. Negative, Doctor. Caldwell's voice was maddeningly calm, a man looking at a spreadsheet rather than a disaster. Atmospheric conditions are too hostile for a shuttle descent. Furthermore, Protocol 8 dictates that in the event of a Category A seismic collapse, all heavy machinery is to be diverted to secure the primary ore vaults. I will not lose 1 billion credits of refined palladium to a sinkhole. There are men buried alive down there, Aiden roared into his mic. They signed the hazard waivers. Aiden, secure the ore. Command out. The line went dead. Aiden dropped his radio, breathing heavily, watching the smoke billow into the frozen sky. Harding, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, limped over from the collapsed watchtower, his squad groaning in the snow behind him. The cranes are offline. Harding coughed, spitting blood into the snow. He looked at the mountain of twisted metal covering the dormitories. The loaders are buried. By the time we dig them out by hand, the ambient cold will freeze them solid in their bunks. We've lost them. Aiden looked at the mountain of debris. Then he looked back at the Alpha. The massive beast was watching him. It shook a layer of soot and snow from its dark armor, letting out a low, inquisitive grunt. Aiden suddenly remembered the seismic readouts from the day before the sudden influx of heavy footfalls, the pack gathering at the perimeter. They didn't just come because of the injuries, Aiden realized, the truth hitting him like a thunderbolt. They came because they felt the pressure building in the crust. They were seeking stable ground. They brought their wounded to the healer, yes, but they also came to the one human who had shown them mercy, hoping to weather the storm together. Aiden walked right up to the Alpha. He didn't know how to speak to an alien predator, but he knew the universal language of desperation. He pointed a trembling, gloved finger at the burning mountain of rubble. My pack is in there, Aiden said, his voice breaking. I helped your pack. Please, I need your help. The Alpha stared at Aiden's outstretched hand, then slowly turned its massive, four-eyed gaze toward the smoldering ruins of Sector 7. The flames reflected in its dark, multifaceted irises. It let out a sharp, clicking sound from its mandibles, a sound of calculation. Penhaligon, have you lost your damn mind? Harding wheezed, leaning heavily against a piece of twisted railing. You're trying to give fetch commands to a planetary apex predator? We need shovels, not a petting zoo. Aiden ignored him. He took a few steps toward the rubble, turning back to look at the beast. Please, he repeated, patting his own chest, then pointing to the debris. Please. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The wind howled, whipping up eddies of ash and snow. Then, the Alpha moved. It didn't walk, it surged. It bypassed Aiden completely, charging directly toward the collapsed refinery stack, with a speed that made the ground tremble. Harding cried out in alarm, reaching for his sidearm, but Aiden slapped his hand away. Watch, Aiden commanded. The Alpha reached the edge of the crater. A massive steel I-beam, weighing easily 3 tons, pinned down the main airlock door leading to the subterranean dormitories. 2 human miners were desperately, futilely hacking at the ice around it with pickaxes, sobbing in frustration. They shrieked and scrambled backward as the giant beast loomed over them. The Alpha ignored the terrified humans. It wedged its 2 massive front claws beneath the lip of the crushed I-beam. The thick muscles in its back coiled, expanding beneath its chitinous armor. It let out a deafening, guttural roar that shook the ash from the sky and heaved upward. With a horrific shriek of tearing metal, the 3-ton beam shifted. The Alpha stood on its 4 hind legs, utilizing its 2 front limbs like industrial hydraulic lifters. It flipped the beam end over end, tossing it 30 feet away into a snowbank, as if it were nothing but a hollow twig. "Sweet, merciful God," Harding whispered, his jaw dropping slack. But the Alpha wasn't done. It let out a sharp, barking command. From the shadows of the courtyard, the rest of the pack responded. 7 fully grown ironhides bounded past the stunned security forces. Even the beast with the newly patched flank and the one with the extracted tooth joined the fray. They swarmed the rubble pile. "Don't just stand there." Aiden screamed at the security contractors, his voice snapping the men out of their paralysis. "Get your med kits! Grab the thermal blankets! Move!" What followed was the most bizarre, miraculous rescue operation in the history of human space exploration. The iron hides acted as living excavators. Their heavy, scythe-like claws were perfectly adapted for tearing through dense permafrost and rock. They sliced through crushed permacrete like butter, digging furiously where human hands would have broken. Aiden directed the chaos. He waded right into the middle of the pack, a tiny human in a sea of alien muscle and armor. He pointed to sections of the rubble, and the beasts obeyed, instinctively understanding his frantic gestures. They weren't just brute force. They possessed a terrifying, delicate precision. "Here," shouted Caleb Foster, a young, grease-covered mechanic who had managed to crawl halfway out of a crushed ventilation shaft. His leg was pinned beneath a slab of concrete. "Doc, I'm stuck!" Aiden rushed over, but the slab was too heavy to budge. He looked up. A female ironhide, the one whose tooth he had pulled, was looming over them. "Can you lift it?" Aiden asked, tapping the concrete. The female chuffed. She carefully slid one razor-sharp claw beneath the slab, inches from Caleb's trapped leg, and lifted. The pressure released instantly. Aiden grabbed Caleb by the collar of his suit and dragged him backward into the snow, just as the rest of the tunnel collapsed with a violent crash. "Thanks, Doc," Caleb gasped, clutching his bruised leg. He looked up at the terrifying alien towering over them. "And thanks, buddy." The female ironhide gently nudged Caleb's shoulder with her snout, a wet, surprisingly warm gesture, before turning back to dig. For 4 agonizing hours, humans and ironhides worked side by side. Harding's security forces, men who had spent the last 6 months shooting these creatures on sight, were now passing heavy steel cables to the beasts, using the animals' raw torque to pull open crushed bulkheads. Corporal Jenkins, who had nearly shot the Alpha hours ago, was actively using a plasma torch to cut rebar, while a massive male ironhide shielded him from falling debris with its own armored body. Deep down, Aiden knew the profound biological significance of what was happening. This wasn't domestication. It was symbiosis. The humans provided the tactical direction and the precision tools. The beasts provided the raw power and the localized environmental knowledge. By dawn, the sky above New Svalbard shifted from pitch black to a bruised, sullen purple. The fires had died down to a smolder, and the bitter cold was creeping back in. Aiden sat exhausted on a block of broken concrete, his medical supplies completely depleted. He wiped a mixture of sweat and soot from his face. Before him, wrapped in bright, silver thermal foil, sat 34 miners. Every single man from the night shift had been pulled from the rubble. There were broken bones, severe lacerations, and mild hypothermia, but 0 casualties. 0. Harding walked over to Aiden. The hardened military man looked entirely undone. His uniform was torn, his face was black with soot, and he didn't have his weapon. He had abandoned his rifle hours ago to help carry stretchers. Harding looked past Aiden to where the Alpha was resting in the snow. The great beast was panting heavily, its armor scarred with new gouges from the rubble. The little cub with the high-visibility orange bandage was curled up asleep against the Alpha's massive leg. "I was going to kill them, Doc," Harding said, his voice barely a whisper, hollow with shame. "For 6 months, I've been hunting them. I thought they were mindless monsters." "They're natives, Thomas," Aiden replied softly. "They survive, and survival requires knowing who your allies are." Suddenly, the static of the colony's remaining PA system crackled to life. It was Regional Director Simon Caldwell again, broadcasting from the orbital station. "New Svalbard Command. We are reading thermal signatures of hostile biologicals inside the colony perimeter, dozens of them. Harding, our orbital feeds show you are overrun. The heavy mining mechs are buried, but the automated turret grid in Sector 1 is coming back online. I am remotely authorizing the execution sequence. Clear your men from the firing lines." Aiden's heart stopped. He leaped to his feet. "Caldwell, no! The hostiles saved our men. Do not activate the turrets." "The ore is compromised, Penhaligon. The site is compromised," Caldwell's cold, bureaucratic voice echoed through the courtyard. "Aegis will not allow a breeding population of alpha predators to nest inside a multi-billion credit facility. Commencing purge sequence in 30 seconds. Across the courtyard, the heavy, motorized whine of the Gauss turrets spinning up echoed in the morning air. The laser targeting sights swept across the snow, painting the exhausted iron hides with dozens of deadly red dots. The pack roared in confusion and panic, scrambling to their feet. The Alpha stepped in front of its cub, baring its teeth at the mechanical weapons, preparing for a fight it could not possibly win. Aiden looked at Harding. The security chief's eyes were wide, but a sudden dangerous fire ignited in them. The corporate lapdog had died in the rubble of Sector 7. The man who had emerged was something else entirely. "Doc," Harding said, his voice lethal and calm. "How fast can you run to the comms relay tower?" "Fast enough," Aiden breathed, his muscles burning with a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline. Harding unclipped a heavy-duty plasma cutter from his belt and shoved it into Aiden's chest. "The orbital uplink is routed through the primary relay box at the base of Tower 1. Cut the hardline. I'll buy you as much time as I can." Purge sequence initiating in 20 seconds. Caldwell's synthesized voice droned over the PA, devoid of all human empathy. Aiden didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted through the knee-deep slush. The comms tower was 70 yards away, a skeletal steel spire rising into the freezing morning air. Behind him, the mechanical hum of the General Dynamics automated defense turrets escalated to a high-pitched scream. "Form up!" Harding roared. Aiden glanced over his shoulder. What he saw would be etched into his memory for the rest of his life. Harding, completely unarmed, marched directly into the path of the spinning Gauss barrels. He didn't stand alone. Corporal Jenkins stepped up beside him. Then Caleb Foster, limping heavily on his bruised leg. Within seconds, all 34 surviving miners, still shivering under their silver thermal blankets, formed a solid human wall between the automated turrets and the exhausted pack of iron hides. The turrets violently stuttered. Their targeting lasers bounced wildly across the human chests. "Warning, friendly biometrics detected in the firing line," the automated turret AI announced, its robotic voice clashing with Caldwell's broadcast. "Please clear the area." "I am overriding the biometric safeties!" Caldwell screamed over the radio, his cool demeanor finally shattering into panicked rage. "Aegis Resource Management claims total salvage rights to this site. Move out of the way, Harding, or I will authorize a lethal sweep through your own men." 10 seconds, the automated voice warned. Aiden hit the base of the comms tower hard, his boots sliding out from under him on a patch of black ice. He crashed to his knees, scraping his shins against the frozen permacrete. He scrambled forward, ripping the metal cover off the primary relay box. Inside, a thick bundle of glowing blue fiber-optic cables pulsed with the data stream connecting Caldwell to the colony's defense grid. 5 seconds, the AI chimed. Aiden ignited the plasma cutter. A brilliant beam of superheated purple plasma roared to life, nearly blinding him. Back in the courtyard, the Alpha Ironhide pushed its massive head through the line of humans, standing shoulder to shoulder with Caleb and Harding. It let out a defiant roar at the automated guns, ready to die for the strange, soft creatures that had bled for its pack. "Safety's overridden," Caldwell barked. firing. "Not today, you corporate bastard," Aiden screamed. He drove the plasma cutter straight through the thick trunk of cables. Sparks showered over his visor in a blinding cascade. The blue light within the fiber optics instantly died. In the courtyard, the Gauss turrets unleashed a single, deafening click as their firing hammers snapped forward and hit absolutely nothing. The magnetic coils powered down with a low, dying whine. The targeting lasers flickered and vanished. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the whistling wind of Tartarus. 9. Aiden collapsed against the base of the tower, dropping the plasma cutter into the snow. He looked up. The miners were cheering. Harding was leaning against the Alpha's massive shoulder, laughing in a mixture of sheer disbelief and relief. The giant predator chuffed, nudging the security chief gently with its armored snout. When the Aegis Resource Management retrieval ships arrived 3 weeks later, fully loaded with heavily armed corporate enforcers expecting to reclaim a dead colony, they found something they could not comprehend. They found a fortified settlement, totally self-sustaining. The barricades had been reinforced with massive steel beams that no human could have lifted without heavy machinery. Standing atop those barricades were 300 armed miners, and pacing menacingly beside them was a pack of apex predators, armored in jet-black chitin and fiercely protective of their new human pack. Aegis backed down. The PR nightmare of slaughtering their own workforce, combined with the sheer tactical impossibility of breaking a fortified alliance between humans and native apex predators, forced the corporation to abandon New Svalbard. The planet was renamed Sanctuary. Dr. Aiden Penhaligon never returned to the sterilized mega-wards of Neo-London. Instead, he opened the galaxy's first exo-veterinary clinic. And every morning, when he opened the doors, he was greeted by the sight of a massive, terrifying alpha predator, and a much larger, fully grown juvenile, with a faded, high-visibility orange bandage still proudly wrapped around its right paw. If you enjoyed this incredible tale of interspecies loyalty and defiance against corporate greed, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our daily HFY stories. What would you do in Dr. Penhaligon's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.